So let's start off with quarterback. A lot to choose from, honestly. A lot of really good quarterbacks that are coming back to turn down the draft. But I think we would be remiss, Dolan, to not bring up Carson Beck, the Georgia quarterback, who was simply phenomenal this season.
Yeah, no, I mean, honestly, you watch him, and it's the biggest. To me, it was one of the biggest surprises in the country. I think we figured, okay, Carson Beck could come in there and manage the offense and be stuff. No, he was legitimately one of the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in the country. I think you watch him, and I think as we got into, especially like later in the year, the Kentucky game, the Tennessee game, and I just watch him, I go, yeah, he looks like an NFL quarterback. It just looks like the accuracy is incredible. Throwing down the field when it was kind of thought that they were a work in progress ish kind of thing at receiver, and they were built around Brock Bowers. And I think especially the work that he did with Brock Bowers, was it 3 games that he missed? I mean, just incredible. You could honestly, I think other than Bowers, you could honestly say that Beck was Georgia's best offensive player this year. And I think his skill set gives them such a high floor. I mean, again, with even this year with Georgia and they're coming back, we had him ranked number 1 in our rankings. And to be honest, I don't think that changes. And that's in large part because Carson Beck came back.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the biggest reason why is that he's coming back. And you can make the argument, I probably would make the argument, that he's the number 1 quarterback in college football heading into next year. And you could even make the argument, too, he might be the top quarterback prospect in the 2025 NFL draft. I think that's a big reason why he came back, is I think Trevor, before Beck decided to come back, Trevor Sikkema had him, I think, as a second-round pick, like a top 45-ish prospect. So that would have been enough for a lot of other guys. He is coming back, and hopefully he's hoping to maybe be the number 1 overall pick in next year's draft, which I think has a case for him. Now, 91.6 passing grade this year, 90.9 passing grade, 91.6 overall grade. Only Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix had higher grades this year than Carson Beck in those aspects. Really quick decision maker, accurate to all levels of the field, 80.6% adjusted completion rate. That only trailed Bo Nix among Power 5 quarterbacks. So, like I said, he likely would have been a second-round pick this year, but he's definitely going to be in the running for the top quarterback in next year's draft as well. Some other guys that I wanted to shout out, Quinn Ewers coming back to school as well from Texas. That's a big one. Dylan Gabriel, maybe not a big NFL prospect, but one of the best quarterbacks in college football for sure. Going to Oregon now from Oklahoma. Jalen Moreau, we brought him up before. He's coming back to Alabama, at least for now. And then Jackson Dart from Ole Miss is another guy I want to bring up too, who decided to go back to Mississippi. So a lot of good quarterbacks that are going back to school. Obviously, a lot of them that are entering the NFL draft, but it's going to be interesting to see what the quarterback position looks like next year. Running back was pretty tough, man, because there were a couple guys or a few guys that we could really go with here. But I at least went with TreVeyon Henderson. I don't know if you disagree with me on this, but I think TreVeyon Henderson is probably the best running back prospect who declined the NFL draft. You see right there, he's 4th in rushing yards in the Big Ten this year, 4th in yards after contact. Best receiving grade in the Big Ten, had an unreal true freshman season, dealt with injuries a lot last year, even dealt with injuries a little bit this year as well. But he was he bounced back in a big way as a junior, and he's a home run threat every time he touches the ball. And as you saw, he's a very capable receiver as well. Quinshon Judkins transferring into Ohio State. They got the best backfield in the country, in my opinion, now with Judkins and TreVeyon Henderson. But Judkins was not eligible for this year's draft, so we didn't put him on here. But TreVeyon Henderson, the fact that he declined the NFL draft to go back for his senior year is a big get for the Buckeyes.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that's what you said right there about best backfield in the country. Absolutely, those are two if maybe the 2, but probably 2 of the top 5 backs in the country, I would say. And Henderson, I know Marvin Harrison got all the spotlight, but there was a lot of times last year when Henderson was the guy that really was the engine and bailed them out. I think about the Notre Dame game. I believe when they were struggling in the Rutgers game, he was really the one that kept them going. A big physical runner, one-cut runner, can explode out of the hole and score a 60-yard touchdown anytime you need him to. Having him and Judkins on the same team doesn't feel fair, and I think there's a very clear plan here for Ryan Day. I think he's going to continue to want to be as physical offensively as Michigan. I think there's a change from the high-flying Justin Fields, C.J. Stroud sort of offense to where now you've got in the backfield, look, you've got Henderson, Judkins, and now Will Howard, who is much more, I don't know that he's necessarily like legitimate, like substantially better than Kyle McCord, but what he is more mobile. Will Howard is very fine and willing to run the ball the way they ran it at Kansas State. This Ohio State running game is now just solidified as the foundation of their offense. And I think Howard is a dual threat. I think it's going to be fascinating to see what schemes Ryan Day comes up with in this run game. How much could they get just really wild and start pulling guys like crazy like Howard did at K-State? Is there a ton of read option back in there? Just things that they couldn't do with McCord. And I like Kyle McCord, but that element at times was just missing. We even saw it with Michigan, right, where it's like at times J.J. McCarthy's feet are a weapon. Kyle McCord's feet were not a weapon, and we do know for a fact that Will Howard's feet are, and these two backs setting that up, I doesn't even feel fair, to be honest with you.
It absolutely does not, man. It really is disgusting what they have coming back in that backfield and bringing into that backfield, honestly, with Judkins going in there. Another guy I wanted to shout out to, who we actually interviewed, one of my favorite interviews I've ever done, maybe my favorite, actually. Donovan Edwards going back to Michigan to finally be the lead back now. He actually, in that interview I talked to him, I asked him, I was like, hey, man, give me the honest answer here. Were you a little bit pissed off that Blake Corum went back to school for his senior year instead of declaring for the draft? And he's like, hell yeah, I was pissed off. He's like, I was trying to be the number one back, and he goes back to school, but he's finally going to be the number one back next year. We saw what he did in that national title game, which is absolutely – his first 2 carries were two 40-yard touchdowns. He was averaging like 45 yards. His stat line, I think, after the first quarter was like 2 carries, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns. And it was like, if he just benched him right there, that's the greatest stat line of all time. But he is going back to school. He kind of had a down year a little bit. Wasn't really utilized as much as I thought he would be this year. But I think going into next year, he could really have a breakout year and become the guy that he says he's going to become. So watch that interview if you haven't already. He's hilarious. One of my favorite interviews ever. But he's phenomenal. And then Taj Brooks from Texas Tech, too. Taj Brooks, a really great year for Texas Tech this year. He decided to go back to school. Dalton and I were actually talking about this before the show. That running back position, man, in terms of the returning talent, is disgusting. It's probably at least the best offensive position in college football heading into next year. There's an argument to be made with a defensive position that we'll talk about in a little bit. But the running back, man, is crazy what was going back to school next year.
You just list off, I mean, what were all the names we were saying? It was what? You have Judkins, Henderson, Edwards, Brooks. I'm just trying to pop names off my C.J. Baxter.
Yeah.
Hampton. Taj Brooks. Amarion Hampton. Ollie Gordon. The Doak Walker winner was the 8th guy I just named, right? Ollie Gordon. Jordan James at Oregon's a beast. I mean, you got guys. I lose track right now how many running backs there are. The fact that it took me 8 tries to get to Ollie Gordon, who won the Doak Walker, it just shows you. It is stacked. Trevor Etienne going to Georgia now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
I mean, this might be the most loaded group of running backs in 2025 that maybe we've ever seen. I'm curious to see which, how many or which ones of them might contend for a Heisman first round. I mean, there are so many backs. I can't. I look around and see all the names that are still in college right now, and I can't even believe it. No. Jonah Coleman, the 2 guys for
Jonah Coleman,
who's in Arizona. But
did you see he's in the portal now? Did you see that, Jonah Coleman?
Coleman is.
Yes. Yeah. I wonder if he goes to Washington, right? Follow Jed Fish there.
I think you look at all those kids and just wait for them to see what Fish, if he can get. I mean, if he can get Fafita and McMillan and Coleman,
disgusting.
How many? It's always the suspense now. How many are going to?
Yeah.
How many are going to?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, man. That running back position, and we'll talk about it. So we're actually planning on during the offseason to rank every position, the top 10 players, every position. That's going to be one of the hardest, man, because there are so many guys you could put in that top 10. Not to sound like a homer here, but Nick Singleton and Katron Allen from Penn State, both are really good. Both have to come back as well. That running back position is going to be disgusting next year. Wide receiver. This one was a little surprising when thinking about where he was entering the year. Another Ohio State player, which is why we're saying, hey, we're going to update our top 25 because we had Ohio State outside the top 10 when we thought everyone was leaving. They bring back everyone but Marvin Harrison Jr., basically. So Emeka Egbuka was one of them. The Ohio State receiver was entering the year. He was the number 2 receiver in the country, in my opinion, behind his teammate Marvin Harrison Jr., was a projected first-round pick entering the year as well. Kind of dealt with a nagging ankle injury all year, missed 3 games because of it. But man, this guy is a smooth route runner. You see right there his 86.1% open target rate, 95th percentile over the last 2 seasons. Such a smooth player that I think Will Howard is very happy is going back to school next year to have him as his number 1 receiver. So a little surprising. I thought Egbuka, obviously a down year for him, and probably would have been a second-round pick ultimately, but still a little surprising. And I think a lot of Columbus fans are very, very happy that he's going back to school next year.
Yeah, they should be. And it was a rough year for him. And I mean, there was times where you could see what he could do. The Notre Dame game stands out the most for him. But he came into the, you talk about a second round, potential second round pick this year. He came into the year with top 15 hype.
Yes.
It was thought that him and Harrison were the top 2 guys that were going to come out of this year's draft. And now obviously you got Neighbors and Odunze and Coleman and every other guy but Egbuka, it was a tough year for him. I think between the quarterback situation, his injuries, the way the offense kind of tilted more towards the run game and just towards Marvin Harrison, to be honest with you, when in doubt. I mean, you look at the Penn State game, right? And it felt like every play was a slant to Harrison, and rightfully so. It was working every time. Sorry. But, I think for him to get a chance to be that guy, to be the number 1 guy, if you come back and prove you're the number 1 guy at Ohio State with Will Howard throwing you the ball and trying to and a lot of these guys, I think a lot of these Ohio State guys too, look, they haven't beaten Michigan.
Yep.
It's still even Marvin Harrison talked about it when he was still thinking about it, was, man, we didn't beat Michigan. We haven't beaten them. CJ Stroud, I think, even mentioned after the Colts game when he was like, when they were asking him about Nico Collins and all of that, and he was like, yeah, I didn't beat them. It still bothers me. It's a thing. But I think Egbuka getting a shot to be the number 1 guy at a place like Ohio State, where they've had boatloads of them, he could walk into next year as the first receiver taken out of next year's draft very easily.
He could. I mean, it's going to be tough. I mean, we talk about McMillan, Luther Burden as well. I mean, that's going to be a loaded receiver class that we see next year as well. But, yeah, man, it honestly just a lot went wrong for him this year. You mentioned, I think you brought it up really perfectly, whereas the quarterback situation was obviously worse with Kyle McCord. Marvin Harrison Jr. is your teammate. That's never easy to be. Like, when you're a stud like Emeka Egbuka and you have a guy like a generational talent like Marvin Harrison Jr., you're obviously not going to be the number 1 guy. So that hurts your stats too. And then you got an ankle injury that you deal with all year. So I think a lot went wrong for Emeka Egbuka this year when a lot of people had high expectations. Like, I thought they could have had a Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave thing where it's like, all right, these are 2 top 15 picks that they both had in the same team. Like I said, I had him as my number 2 receiver in the country entering the year behind Marvin Harrison Jr. So I still think he's a very, very talented player. Like I said, he's a smooth player. I guess the one word to really describe Emeka Egbuka is how smooth he is as a route runner especially. And I think he's clearly the top returning prospect that declined the NFL draft at receiver. Another guy I wanted to shout out to, Tez Johnson, the Oregon receiver. He's going back to school as well. He had an awesome year as their kind of slot receiver this year. I like Tez Johnson a lot too. So I think he's another guy that deserves a shout out, who's going back to school at least for a receiver. Tight end, this one was pretty easy to me, Dalton, because a lot of the tight ends declared for the draft. But I wanted to shout out Mitchell Evans, who a lot of people just kind of forgot about, the Notre Dame tight end. He had played 9 games this year, tore his ACL, which was brutal, obviously, for Notre Dame and for Mitchell Evans. But before that, his 422 receiving yards were 4th among FBS tight ends this year through 9 weeks. And also, he had 10 forced missed tackles after the catch, which were second to only Brock Bowers through the first 9 weeks, too. I think this guy's a stud. He's the ultimate security blanket that Riley Leonard is going to love next year. But he's more than just a security blanket, man. He could really, create after the catch as well. I mean, there's a case to be made with Mitchell Evans being the number 1 tight end in the country heading into next season.
No, I think he is. I think he's the best. As long as he recovers from the injury, he's the best tight end in the country. I think for him, I think, what did I call him in a previous show? Riley Leonard's best friend.
Yeah.
He needs to get to know Mitchell pretty quick because between there's the safe throws, but I think he's a really underrated threat up the seam. I just think when he got hurt, I think they lost a vertical element down the middle of the field in their offense, and it really hurt them. I mean, we know Notre Dame can play defense. They got a ton of guys coming back on defense we'll get into, but to be honest, I think when he was in there, he was their best weapon in the passing game. I think their wide receiving core was a little disappointing, but when Evans got hurt, you could really feel the impact of their pass. They had a hard time dropping back, throwing the football after he got hurt. And I think him making plays down the seam inside the numbers really, if they can get that element back and he's 100% this year, and you open things up for guys on the outside like Chris Mitchell and all those transfers they brought in, I think it's just a different dimension that most teams don't have. I kind of felt the same way about like Cade Stover at Ohio State this past year, where I think it just helped a lot. It helps a lot to have that guy threatening safeties, and right now I don't think there's anybody better in the country returning than Mitchell Evans with that.
Yeah, definitely. I think Mitchell Evans, I mean, you lose Michael Mayer, man. A lot of people thought, that obviously that's a huge loss, one of the best tight ends in college football history, Michael Mayer. But Mitchell Evans, man, he filled in his shoes very nicely this year. So Mitchell Evans, our top tight end who's returning to school, and maybe our number one tight end entering the year too. I think Colston Loveland from Michigan has a very good case as well. He's a very, very good player. But Mitchell Evans, we'll see when we do our tight end rankings. We'll see who the number one is. But Mitchell Evans, if he's not number one, he's definitely number two. So Mitchell Evans is definitely a stud. All right, offensive tackle now. This one was a lot tougher. A lot of the top guys are entering the draft. Joe Alt, Olufashanu, Talisa Fuaga, all the top, J.C. Latham. This guy, I wanted to shout him out too. You don't really hear too much about him, but he graded out super highly for us. And when I was watching his tape last night, it deserved that grade, honestly. Ariante Ursary from Minnesota, who had the second best run blocking grade among FBS tackles this year, only behind Talisa Fuaga. And like I just mentioned, Talisa Fuaga probably going to be a top 15 pick in the NFL draft as well. So Ariante Ursary, man, he's a really underrated offensive tackle, I think. And going back to Minnesota next year, I think Golden Gopher fans should be very excited about that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what you get. Minnesota every couple of years comes out one of these big mauling run blocking tackles, right? Like the Ravens now have Daniel Faalele, and it's like that's just the culture up there. It's 6'6", he's 6'6", he's 330. It's 0 degrees out, and they have an offensive tackle that's going to run you over. That's exactly what you're getting with Ursary. He's going to be on a lot of big boards next year for the physicality alone. I don't know that he's good enough in pass protection necessarily to be a first-round pick. That could use some work, but the run blocking and the power and the physicality alone absolutely makes that guy. He's a stud, man. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, Talisa Fuaga, people were worried about his pass pro too, but I mean, he's such a dominant run blocker that I remember talking to Trevor about Fuaga. He's like, man, he's just so good in run blocking. I had to put him in top 15. He's just like that good. He's a people mover, man. Ursary is a people mover. Also, he's had some, so I want to bring this up. He's had some awful games in pass protection. He's had some absolutely terrible games. The Michigan game was terrible. I believe their bowl game against Bowling Green really struggled too. But he's also had some really, really good games as well. So he's got to become more consistent in pass pro. One of the games I wanted to shout out that he actually played really well, Ohio State, who will bring up their edge defenders in just a second because they got both of them coming back. But against Jack Sawyer and JC Tuimoloau, he only allowed one pressure on 23 pass blocking snaps. So he played really well in that game. I think it's just more consistency with Ursary than anything else. So he's a dominant run blocker, inconsistent pass protector right now. He's had some horrible, horrible pass pro games, but some awesome games as well. So I think Ursary definitely got to keep an eye on next year. I definitely think the offensive tackle class next year is carried by the sophomores that are right now, like Kelvin Banks Jr. from Texas, Will Campbell from LSU. Those are the guys. But in terms of the guys who could have been in this year's draft that declined it, I think Ursary probably is a top guy there. Interior offensive line, another one that was kind of tough to pick because a lot of the top guys are entering the draft. But I went with Luke Kandra, man, from Cincinnati, who really good at Louisville last year. He was one of 11 Power 5 guards in 2022. Didn't allow a sack or a hit on 160 pass blocking snaps. And then this year, he had an 81.9 grade at Cincinnati that was third among Power 5 guards this year. So, like I said, a lot of the top interior offensive linemen are entering the draft. One of them I want to shout out to, Donovan Jackson, the guard from Ohio State, kind of had a down year, but he was a 5-star recruit coming out, had a great true freshman year, I believe, or true sophomore year. He's also really good too, but I wanted to give a shout out to Luke Kandra here as our interior offensive lineman.
No, yeah, I totally agree, and it's sometimes it's hard to find these guys, and we have several good ones. I mean, we think about this year it felt like the year of the center with Jackson Powers Johnson and Van Pran from Georgia. I think it's a hard one because it's one where you try to find there's so many. It feels like this class of 2025, the true class of 2025, is just so loaded at all of these positions that we're really picking and prodding at certain ones you mentioned, like at running back, or I think the offensive line works the same way, where it's like kind of that tweener thing where we're getting a lot coming out and we got a lot coming up, and then guys that declined, it's like there's not too many to pick from. But no, a really good performer at Cincinnati. They have no issues in the trenches. They just need to figure out how how to make things work at quarterback and on the outside to really complement their run game. They can run the football, no doubt, and Kandra's a big reason for it. I think another guy I wanted to throw in there too. I know he transferred to Mississippi State. Did Ethan Miner, was that an option one, or was he too young?
Good. Yeah, good call. Yeah, I didn't even think about him too much, but he's definitely a good guy we should shout out too.
That would be another one I would keep an eye on, is transferring from North Texas to Mississippi State. I believe he finished last year as the second or third highest graded center. That's another one. If you're looking for a center instead, I would keep an eye on Ethan Miner at Mississippi State.
Definitely. Good call there.